Welcome to this episode of Mind, Body, and Beyond, where we're diving into some of the biggest questions about life, choice, and meaning. Do we really have free will? How is everything around us interconnected? And if life is inherently without purpose, is there still space for optimism? Today, we're exploring these ideas with a new perspective, breaking down the illusion of control, finding beauty in the randomness, and discovering how we can still create a life that feels deeply meaningful through kindness in a universe that may not necessarily be. I wanted to share with you some thoughts that I've been thinking about lately related to purpose, generosity, life, our minds, and so much more. So, let's dive straight into it, because I have a lot to say. I was recently introduced to the topic of optimistic nihilism. Let me give you a brief overview of what this means. So, we as humans used to think that we were at the center of the universe, right? We thought that the Earth was in the center of the solar system and that all the planets and the sun revolved around us. But as we have developed our science and learned more about how the world truly is, we realize that we are really just a speck of dust in a solar system with many other planets, in an average galaxy among so many in our cluster, in a huge universe. And we'll never be able to get out of our galaxy because of the sheer humongous size of it, and we'll never know what's beyond our universe. And on the spectrum of time, we know now that the universe isn't infinite, and that it too, no matter how long it has been here, has a lifespan, a birth and a death. The universe has been around for so long, and its story is really not about us. In fact, it's purely by coincidence that life on Earth was created. And then, of course, you will die. The Earth will be absorbed by the sun in about 7.5 billion years. The universe itself, the thing that sort of represents infinity in our minds and forever, will also die. And so, since everything in the end will be lost, that leaves us wondering, what's the point of it all? We've been told from a very young age that we need to change the world and leave a long-lasting impact and legacy that will go far beyond our deaths. And as we grow up and realize how big the world actually is, and how many people there are to help and how many problems there are to solve, that purpose starts to seem more and more overwhelming. And often what we do when we get so overwhelmed is we just freeze and end up doing nothing at all. So focusing on little things can be more sustainable and healthier and finding purpose in simple actions like spreading joy to the people around you seems much more achievable and realistic. We've been gifted the gift of living a life on this beautiful planet that we share with so many different people. So, instead of worrying about the future and whether people will remember us and the fact that everything will technically be lost, we can focus on the now, and we can focus on the beauty that there is in the world right now around us. While it is all true that the world will end and the universe will die and that we will die, there's no point in worrying about things that are out of our control. So my opinion on optimistic nihilism is that we should just enjoy everything that we have already in the present now, because we've lived through so many good experiences and have so much more yet to discover. There's so much still to learn about this earth, so much to experience. Maybe life is truly meaningless and us being on earth here is purely a coincidence, but so what? That means we get to create our own purpose here. And since in the end, everything will be forgotten, including all our mistakes and all our achievements, why not just try as much as we can, have fun, focus on the present moment, and make the human experience as pleasant as we can for ourselves and for the people around us. I think the best thing that we can do as humans is to offer love and joy to ourselves and to the people surrounding us. The second point is that everything we experience is technically an illusion. What we see, for example, is just visual signals and lights being interpreted by our brain. How can I be sure that my blue is the same as your blue? You might have been seeing red your whole life, but you've been taught to associate that color with the word blue since you were born. and you have a complete different perception of the world. The way we perceive the world around us is unique to us and is the only way that we will ever perceive the world. Other animals, for example, perceive the world completely different. Birds can see UV lights, dogs see mostly gray, brown, yellow, blue hues, and even plants have their own perception mechanisms and can distinguish light from the morning and light from the evening. So our perception of the world, as much as we usually go from the basis that is the same for everyone, is actually unique to us and could be completely different from person to person. So what you consider a red apple could be perceived as something completely different by another organism or another person. We'll never know. Everything you see gets processed in your brain, which is really just a bunch of molecules and electricity. So, since everything that you consider reality is in your head, that means if you change the way you think, if you change the way that your brain or head works, in other words, your mindset, then you can start to change your reality. And this links into manifestation, but that's beyond the point for today. I've also been thinking a lot about free will. Free will is a theory that questions your basic ability to make decisions and influence the future. And this sort of goes against everything that we've learned, which is why it can be sort of a controversial theory, but hear me out. If you think about it, you're made of particles that follow the laws of physics and are influenced by everything that happened before. For example, if you push something, it's likely going to fall, and it didn't fall for no reason. It fell because you pushed it, and you pushed it because you had the idea to push it, and you had the idea to push it because of a whole chain of neural synapses that happened in your brain that went all the way down to your hands and ordered it to move. So, since every event is influenced by what happened before the event, you could argue that as everything is determined by what happened previously, your existence, your actions, your behaviors, and the decisions you're making to even listen to this episode can be traced all the way back to the Big Bang. Wow. And this obviously raises the question, if everything can be traced back to the Big Bang, then theoretically, if we had a super smart machine that could factor in the specific position of every single particle on the planet, as well as its movements, could it then predict the future? Could we take it then the other way around and say that because of this thing that happened in the past, now we can predict everything that's going to happen in the future because of this one event, including your decision? Logically, the answer is yes, because nothing happens randomly. A thought that pops into your head, quote-unquote randomly, might seem random, but there was actually a whole chain of neural synapses that led you to that thought and led that thought to make its way into your conscious mind. And those electrical signals in your brain were triggered by another experience or thought, whether you realize that consciously or not. So, the illusion that we have of randomness isn't really true because the only reason, let's say, a glass would fall over, which might seem random, is because it got pushed by, say, your arm, and the only reason you moved your arm is because you had to grab something, and so on and so on. Technically, the title for this podcast episode, Random Philosophical Thoughts, is incorrect because these thoughts didn't come into my head randomly. They are a result of a whole chain of events that happened because of some stimulus that I happened to be exposed to. So, we can trace one event back across a series of events all the way back to the Big Bang. So, if we can trace everything back to the Big Bang, then we can do the opposite and predict the future and how everything is going to unfold. That means you're technically not really making any decision to influence the future. You're only just following a path that's already been predetermined. And this is not to say that you cannot choose right now to get up and do something that's good for yourself. Because what a lot of people do when they hear about this theory of free will is say that, oh, I'll just sit down on the couch and I don't have any power over my life. Let me just do nothing at all. But you're still responsible for your life and the way that you choose to lead it. This theory simply argues that technically all your actions are already predetermined, shaped by your biology, experiences, and environment. But that doesn't mean that you're powerless. In fact, recognizing this theory of free will can be empowering. It allows you to let go of unnecessary guilt or self-blame from the past and focus instead on making conscious, intentional choices in the present. While you may not control the forces that influence you, you can decide how to work with them to create a life that aligns with more of your values and aspirations. Lastly, I want to discuss the interconnectedness of everything. As much as we like to think of ourselves as individual entities separate from the rest of the world, we really aren't. Our cells are constantly exchanging fluids and molecules that come from the outside, from our environment, from what we ingest and excrete, and they are also constantly renewing themselves. So this is a simple example of our constant interaction with the environment. The air we breathe flows through us all the time. And it's the same air that other people around us breathe as well, and that other organisms are also breathing. And the oxygen comes from plants. When we die, we will become part of the soil and become nutrients for other organisms. Everything is interconnected. Even our little day-to-day actions have an impact on something, which will have an impact on something else and possibly someone, which can influence their actions, and so on. It really makes you think the next time you do something that may seem so harmless, like throwing a plastic bottle on the floor instead of in the trash can. Also, all the different elements on the periodic table that make us up come from stars that fuse hydrogen together to make helium and then produce heavier and heavier elements. And these elements are all released when the star dies and ejects all these elements in a supernova, creating a large cloud of dust. Stars are formed in these great clouds of dust that are rich in all these elements. And that's how our sun and our solar system was formed. That's how our planet was made. And that's how life ended up on Earth, from those clouds of dust that came out of stars. So we're all made of stardust. We're all made of the same thing, and this sort of unites all living organisms and even non-living organisms on Earth. We're all made of the same stardust. So what we can take away from this interconnectedness is that everything, even a little act of kindness, can go a long way. Because everything has an effect on something else, and everything can trigger a whole chain of events, of positivity, for example. It might not mean a lot to you to do a little act of kindness, but it could mean the world to the person who is receiving it. And it doesn't hurt for you to try, so why not? If there's anything you take away from this episode, it would be to be kind, spread joy and love around you, and make that your purpose in life. Thank you so much for listening to Mind, Body, and Beyond. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.